Iran and Israel frequently exchange threats of mutual destruction. Their hostilities peaked in April when Iran launched drones and missiles in its first direct attack against Israel in response to a deadly Israeli strike on its embassy in Syria, which killed 13 people. Tensions ratcheted up again in July when, within hours of one another, Israel killed Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr in Beirut, and Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran after attending President Masoud Pezeshkian's inauguration. Many expected those killings might trigger a wider regional war, but so far, no major response has been forthcoming. In this recent address at the UN General Assembly, the representative sent stern warnings to Israel about its recent conduct. Here is the full speech.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Mr. President, as this is the first time my delegation has taken the floor in the General Assembly under your chairmanship, I am pleased to congratulate you on your election as the Chair of General Assembly for the 79th session and assure you of our support throughout your tenure. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, based on the general debate held in the previous meeting and the adoption of 3 resolutions regarding the question of Palestine in 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly during the last year, the international community expressed its commitment to addressing the dire humanitarian needs of Palestine and requested an immediate ceasefire in the occupied Palestinian territories, as well as the realization of the inalienable right of the Palestinians to self-determination and full-fledged membership in the United Nations. As we have witnessed since then, there has been no positive change in Israeli apartheid policies and actions, resulting in Palestinians being left with no choice but to resist massive destructive attacks by Israeli forces and armed settlers against their homeland and people, including their women and children. We are witnessing impressive resistance by our Palestinian brothers and sisters in the face of the horrific and unfair invasion and bombardment by Israeli forces backed by a few specific countries, emanating from the apartheid and genocidal policies of Israeli atrocities. No, many freedom-seeking nations have found Palestinian resistance as an outstanding and admirable effort. We recall the International Court of Justice through its most recent advisory opinion rendered on July 19th, underlined that the Israeli occupation of Palestine territory is illegal and constitutes internationally wrongful act that entail full responsibility of the said regime. In this regard, the court has been unequivocal that the Israeli regime is under an obligation to cease its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory and stop all settlement activities in occupied Palestinian territory immediately, in addition to the evacuation of all settlers. Moreover, this regime is required to compensate all natural and legal persons involved in the occupied Palestinian territory for damage that the occupation has caused. It is critical to note that the Israeli occupation has been taking place for a long time, which is also the most pertinent issue that the Israeli regime deliberately omits. It is not surprising that the representative of this regime in a statement delivered to this meeting did not address their illegal occupation, which is primary focus of this meeting. Their word means to have begun from last year, and the primary and only cause of Palestinian resistance, which is the Israeli illegal occupation from several decades ago, should not be at rest. Mr. President, in light of our first obligation under UN Charter, we must take effective collective measures to remove these long-lasting threats to peace. It is high time for us as United Nations members to fulfill this obligation. The suppression of acts of Israeli aggression and its breach of peace, as well as an adjustment or settlement to this situation, which is clearly causing a breach of peace, is essential. Over the past year, Israeli forces have engaged in a violent act of aggression against the Gaza Strip and other territories under occupation, which has resulted in the death of more than 40,000 Palestinian civilians. Amid ongoing atrocities against civilians in Gaza, the Israeli regime continues its relentless aggression and act of terrorism against civilians in Lebanon. Just a few hours ago today, in a cyber-terrorist attack, the regime detonated communication devices in Beirut, resulted in the deaths and injury of thousands of people, including our ambassador in Beirut. We extend our sincere condolences to the families of the victims and the government of Lebanon, and strongly condemn this act of sabotage and terrorism by the rogue regime of Israel. The Israeli regime must be held accountable for such aggression and heinous crime. Is there a certain number of women and children who must be killed before the international community decides to intervene and put an end to this war machine that is warmongering and brutal? On the ground, all of the risk factors and definition set forth in Article 2 of the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of Crimes of Genocide are present, thereby placing responsibility on every member state to prevent the crime from ever occurring. In spite of the fact that the Israeli authorities have committed a wide variety of crimes by occupying Palestinian lands, killing Palestinians, and dislocating Palestinian populations, they are enjoying total impunity. It is regrettable that this regime has violated its obligations under UN Charter on numerous occasions. In addition to refusing to accept and carry out the decision of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the International Court of Justice, it also rejects complying with international law. It is the policy and practice of this regime to consistently violate the principles outlined in the Charter and relevant conventions and resolutions. In our view, not only should Palestine be admitted as a full member of the United Nations, but also Israel's illegal acts must trigger the commitment of all United Nations members to reconsider the membership of this regime in the United Nations in accordance with Article 6 of the Charter. I would like to conclude by stating that my delegation will vote in favor of the resolution drafted in this regard. Given the urgency of the situation and the importance of terminating the occupation in Palestine and putting an end to Israeli apartheid policies and practices against the Palestinians, it is also necessary to confirm Israel's obligation to let all displaced Palestinians return to their homeland and give them back their land and other immovable property, as well as make reparation for damage caused to all persons concerned in occupied Palestinian territory. Additionally, I want to state that our support for the resolution is without prejudice to our long-standing and consistent national position on the question of Palestine, which includes non-recognition of Israeli regime as well as the date when the occupation is believed to have begun. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, we gather today to discuss the question of Palestine, a stark reminder of the importance of multilateral action, but at the same time, a proof of the limit of its frameworks, including these very United Nations. On the one hand, without the international law, without the global fora of nations, the Palestinian cause would have faded into oblivion in a world dominated by narrow interests. On the other hand, multilateral action has shown its limitation, despite the consensus of the international community and the successful binding resolution that plainly affirm and reaffirm the Palestinian rights to self-determination, Palestinian right to their land, Palestinian right to their statehood. Yes, we find ourselves unable to enforce them. This failure stems from an occupying power that disregards international law and thrives on impunity, acting as though it is above the law. In Gaza, in the West Bank, the Israeli occupier continue to kill, continue to arrest, with the toll of victims surpassing in nearly 1 year 41,000 martyrs, almost 100,000 wounded, and more than 10,000 Palestinian detainees. The Israeli occupying power desecrates holy sites of Al-Quds Sharif and forcibly displace its people. Just this morning, we witnessed another assault from Israeli settlers protected by the Israeli police into the mosque of Al-Aqsa. The occupying power openly denies the right of the Palestinian people and seeks to undermine the establishment of their states. Mr. President, in light of this bleak reality, which threatens to extinguish hope in the heart of the Palestinians and peace lovers around the world, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice came. This historic and comprehensive decision by the highest judicial body in the world challenges the Israeli occupation narrative and exposes its apartheid policies. It reaffirms the illegality of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories and the need to its end. Now, as President Abdelmajid Tebboune has emphasized, and I quote, "We, the advocates of the just peace, bear the responsibility
to end the historic injustice inflicted on the Palestinian people, an outcome achievable only by compelling the occupying power to comply with international law. End of quote. Mr. President, the voice of justice has spoken, and it is imperative that we shall all abide by its ruling. Failing to do so will disrupt the very foundations of the international order. We should ensure the full implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion. For this purpose, the State of Palestine submitted to the General Assembly this historic draft resolution. And this draft is historic in its significance, as it is the first resolution submitted by the State of Palestine in its national capacity in the history of the United Nations. It is another victory on the path to full membership to the United Nations. It is also historic in its content, as it outlines a roadmap to end the occupation and enable the Palestinian people to fully enjoy their rights. My country, Algeria, having always stood by Palestine, promptly sponsored this draft resolution and call on all members to support it, to vote in favor of it. Today, we must be united in our support, in our solidarity with the Palestinian people. We must stand together in defense of international law. We must stand united for peace. I thank you.